Is forecasting 2015 growth in Europe at 1.5%. Anemic, but that's better than a possible recession. However, the IMF still calls the Eurozone economy fragile. We spoke earlier with Ivand Eland from the Independent Institute, who argues for more austerity, not less. Ivand, I kind of consider the IMF the grown-up version of the World Economic Forum. What are sort of the main topics that they're going to be pursuing? We've been talking a lot about Greece. I imagine that's at the top of the agenda.
Yeah, I think it is, easing the Greek bailout if they're going to do it or whatever. But there's other issues, too, like the monstrous debt that Ukraine has, Brazil has, et cetera. And also, in general, the sluggish growth around the world. They're sort of encouraging countries to take advantage, pump up their economies, which I think is probably a mistake in the long term. But that's what they're trying to, goose the sluggish growth a bit.
Do you think the finance ministers and Christine Lagarde feel like they're in the same place every single year over the past few years? Because Europe just seems to be kind of stuck in the mud.
Yeah, I think this debt crisis is, that's still dragging everybody down, and that's the thing that's really looming over the heads of everybody is debt.
And okay, so we have this big debt crisis, and I mean, are they going to continue to push for austerity measures? I guess they are. That seems to be their policy.
Well, I think that's the IMF's game, but there's always strings attached, and countries don't like it because it causes unrest when they do the austerity programs. But, over time, look at the European economies that are doing well, Germany and Britain, and they had austerity programs of varying shades. And so I think in the long term, you really have to deal with the debt, and you have to spend less on government and put more back into the private sector.
You mentioned the UK for a moment. I understand that the IMF is pushing the UK to spend more on public programs. A good move, and why?
Well, I don't think it is. No, I'm not sure the UK's, they think that UK is going to be in deficit, so I'm not sure why they're doing that. The UK says they're going to be in surplus, but the UK over time has reduced its deficit dramatically from about 10% of GDP to, probably, less than 1%. So I think Britain is going the right way, and I don't think they should monkey with what Britain is doing. Britain is one of the success stories, I would say.
Do you think that there is a ratcheting up of anxiety right now that Europe as a whole is going to slip back into a recession?
Well, I think it could be, depending on if the Greece situation has a lot of psychological effects, and they very well could.
Okay, so in Africa, part of the IMF and part of the World Bank is something called the African Development Bank, which helps supply funding for new projects in Africa, helps loan money, helps set sort of an agenda. There's an election of the next person who will lead the Development Bank. It may not be a man. It may, in fact, be a woman this year. How significant is the Development Bank, and how has it done over the past few years, do you think?
Well, I don't think any of these development banks really develop much. I think they funnel a lot of aid in there, but I think really what countries need to do is change their policy so they get a lot of private investment. The private investment flows vastly dwarf anything that these banks can provide, and these banks provide a cushion so that these countries don't have to make the reforms that are necessary to get private investment. So I think it's actually sort of counterproductive in some cases. So I don't think a new president is going to change that, that dynamic.
But doesn't the development bank sort of backstop and provide some risk management? Because when private investment goes into Africa, there has always been a concern about where that money goes and whether those countries are going to honor contracts. Is that an important element for what it does?
Well, I think it certainly does that, but it sort of distorts the market. I think there are more efficient ways of doing that than what they're doing. And I think, African countries and other countries around the world, they really have to know that they have to honor contracts. They have to free up their economies, et cetera. That's the path to growth. And anything that's cushioned for that, you may say it's a hard, knocks therapy, but I mean, that we've just gone decade after decade after decade of these countries doing this type of thing, irresponsible behavior. We see it not only in Africa, but in Europe, Greece, et cetera. These countries have to, have a reckoning at some point, and the quicker the better.
Okay. Ivand Eland from the Independent Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much.
Thank you.